Hello, all, and welcome back to another episode of TV and Us, a conversation show about the TV series we just can't stop talking about. My name is Jennifer Hahn.
And I'm Sarah Callan.
And we are joined today for our True Detective journey with Nate and Pat. So here on TV and Us, each season we focus on a different show, reviewing it episode by episode, and we invite you to watch along with us. We are currently on True Detective, and we are on episode 2, titled Seeing Things. If you haven't watched it yet, this is your spoiler alert. Please check it out before continuing to listen. Sarah, do you want to kick us off with an IMDb summary for True Detective episode 2?
Sure. Cole and Hart travel around trying to track down leads to their case. Darker sides of Hart's personal and family lives are revealed.
All right. Awesome. And so we're going to kick off with our episode titles of choice for episode 2 here. Who wants to start us off? Sarah, how about you kick us off?
All right, my choice is Days Like Lost Dogs.
It's a good choice.
Nate, do you want to go next?
Sure. I went with Sharp Eye for Weakness.
Nice. I love that scene. Pat, what was your choice?
Skeletons, skeletons, and oh, more skeletons.
Nice. And my choice was hallucinations or intuitions. All right. So we had a pretty interesting discussion for episode 1. Now that we are here with episode 2, I am intrigued to hear if some folks were more satisfied with some of the things that they may have been looking for. Cough, Sarah, cough. And also just, how this show continues to build upon the foundations that it has laid from episode 1.
Yeah, I'm still in the it's fine camp, which is like the worst thing that you can say. It's fine. I'm not into this show. I wouldn't be watching this if we weren't recording this podcast. I'm still pretty uninterested in our 2 main characters, and I'm also uninterested in the mystery. So I'm waiting for something to happen that hooks me, and it hasn't happened yet. So we will see if and when that happens.
I'm baffled.
Bummer.
I'm loving seeing Nate's facial expressions just unfold across his face.
Well, there's 8 episodes in this season, so we're like a quarter of the way through. Yeah, so I don't know. I think there's some more exciting stuff coming, but if you're not hooked yet, that's a shame. I haven't encountered this.
I haven't encountered it. We're going to get to episode 7. Sarah's going to be like, it's fine. I'm still waiting for something to happen.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, this show's got one more shot with episode 8.
Yeah, we will see. We will see. I would be surprised if that happens, but we will find out here in a few episodes.
I mean, let's be honest. We know that it's been confirmed that Marty sucks and he's a cheater.
He sure
but
does
you can't let that one character problem ruin the whole show for you. And I have to believe that it's only that.
No, it's not that. Because to me, like, Marty also isn't interesting to me. And so when the whole show is about exploring these 2 dudes, and I'm not interested in Marty, because there's nothing like really redeemable about him to me. There's nothing that's, making me want to spend more time with him and learn more about who he is as a character. I think Rust is interesting, but even with him, I don't have this like deep desire to like learn more about who he is as a character. So I'm not hooked yet. I don't know. It's very weird. I am surprised at this development, but here we are.
Yeah, when this episode wrapped up, I was like, oh no, she's not going to be pleased, because it really doesn't continue to build significantly with the actual case, which I thought was interesting. I thought that they might have more details around the case, but honestly, when the episode ends, you're kind of like, this really is about these two men. Like, this really is a character driven, at least up until this point. I don't know, maybe the case continues to evolve over the course of the show, and they're just laying these foundations now. But so much time is spent with these two people learning more about who they are, their pasts, their presence, their like value systems, and kind of their thoughts, which I thought was very interesting as the show kind of anchors around these two men. I also am like very intrigued to see if they make Marty more redeemable. It's one of the things that I jotted down as far as like what do I want to see next. Because right now he's not great. He's not very effective in the case, and he kind of sucks as a person, and it's like playing the same tune, you know. But I could listen to Russ talk for hours, so that's the thing that's holding me on is every scene with Russ.
Yeah, so Jen, would you say that you are not as gripped as you were after episode 1?
I think that this episode 2 does what episode 1 does for Rust, where it goes really deep into who Rust is as a person. This episode seems to focus a lot more on Marty. And now that they've built those two foundations, episode 3 feels like we can't keep playing the same tune. And so I feel like they're going to need to make it, you know, more complex or contradict the things that we seem to know about these people, because I think it's basically confirmed things that we've already known about them. So I'm intrigued. I think episode 3 will be pretty pivotal as far as like which directionally where we're going to go next. This feels like foundation building, you know, like we've put in the groundwork. We've maybe built a solid foundation now. All right, we're ready for the journey.
Yeah. I do think that this is probably the weakest episode as far as like plot continuation goes. And like not much happens in the case and stuff like that. You just kind of get like a deeper layer of like Russ' philosophy and also like Marty's shittiness with like his family life in particular. But yeah. I'm interested, Sarah. Do you normally like character studies? Like you like Succession, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I loved Succession, and so I think it's very interesting.
Why? So yeah,
yeah.
So I watched 2 or 3 episodes of Succession and I couldn't continue it because I hated every character. I think I felt what you're feeling on this show. So I'm curious, like square the circle on like the difference between those two for me.
Well, and I think like I think that Marty is a trash person, but like I don't have like a strong feeling about this show even. Like I feel like it would even be more fun if I like actively hated this show, but I don't. It's just I feel kind of like neutral about it. I'm like whatever. We can keep going on this journey and we'll see if I ever come around, but I'm not actively for it or against it. I'm just kind of like, okay, it's a thing. I think for me, Succession is a number of things. And for me, a large part of it is the writing and just the way that it's structured, and the dialogue is so quippy, the characters are so complex, and yes, they are all terrible people. But there's also something empathetic that like draws me into them. Like I binged watched the entire first season in a weekend. I was hooked instantly. And I don't feel that about True Detective, which is I'm very surprised about this. I thought I was going to love True Detective, but I'm in the neutral zone right now.
What about did you ever watch Mad Men?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Did you like that show?
Yes. It's weird. I don't understand strange. Why I
Mad
don't.
Men also is mostly like irredeemable bastards.
Yes.
And I think it's actually a better comparison because it's like I think the case is like the backdrop for like these people's relationships, in the same way that like advertising is the backdrop for like their relationships and stuff like that.
Is some of it to do with how hyped up this has been? Like, did you go in with a hyper vigilant and critical eye to say, if this isn't perfect in my mind, it therefore doesn't even get a passing grade?
That's true. Are your hater senses tingling?
Well, and so that's something that I'm trying to be cognizant of, because I can be a contrarian, and if everybody likes something, then I'm like, I'm not going to like it. But I don't feel that way. Like, again, I think if I were actively like against this show, then it could be some of that, but I feel very neutral about it, which is such a weird thing to say about this show. Yeah. You should have a strong feeling about it. And I don't. I genuinely think that it's fine, which is the worst thing to say.
Fair enough.
Maybe this whole season is just like, why doesn't Sarah like this thing?
Oh, it's 100% going to be that. You didn't know that you were going to have your psyche interrogated by us every week, but it's... I wonder if... Well, like, what makes characters interesting is when there's contradictions in and of themselves, right? And I think Rust is interesting because there are more of those contradictions, and perhaps Marty is less interesting because he fits the archetype of what we know of, like a misogynistic, like self-deluded, arrogant, like but knows how to play the game, like type of character that we've seen a ton. So I'm intrigued if in episode 3 or 4 or 7 there's more of those tensions and contradictions, does that become more interesting to you as a character study? Like, even if the case ultimately isn't what you expect it to be from a detective perspective, if those characters then become more interesting because they're making choices that are misaligned from what we thought we knew about them.
Yeah, we'll see. And I think another, I don't know, I think that Marty, I wish that he had maybe more charisma or something like that. Like, to me, he's just kind of this creep who is just kind of mean and like doesn't do a whole lot. Like, I don't understand what he's adding to the table, so it's hard for me to like find something to like, oh, okay, this is the likable, this is the redeemable part of you, because I'm just like, you're just kind of
so
not great.
We could pivot a little bit and switch up from talking about what isn't to what is. And I think that Marty is a fish who's grown to fit his fishbowl. I would argue that he does have charisma. He is charming, but within the bounds of the community that he's surrounded by. Is he as like screen charming as Rust is to the rest of us? No. But when you watch his interactions with his fellow detectives and like others in the community, he actually comes off as pretty charming. He's at the bar, he's got everyone laughing, he's the center of attention, he's telling his stories, you know, he's charming enough to make a drunken phone call and have a girl who's like, you know, significantly younger invite him over and somehow put up with his very patriarchal bullshit control whole thing. So I think like if you dropped him in a major city, he wouldn't know what to do with himself, and he would be just some like, he'd come off as, you know, some backcountry fellow. But I think in his community, he's like in the top percentile in terms of knowing how to play that game and do that dance.
Yeah, there's a comment that the Major makes, which is to Cole, which is that you're only here by the grace of the upstanding reputation. Which I was like, upstanding reputation? I'm like, what? But I think Marty is, while he confirms a lot of our intuitions about him from episode 1, I think what's interesting about him is the amount of self-delusion that he's living within. You know, like even his present day self in that interview, he clearly has not self-reflected and digging deep within himself and his choices that he's made and the falling apart of his marriage and whatnot, to really like see himself and see his situation and what he's done clearly. You know, like his whole little monologue around like you got to get your head on right. It's for the better of your family. It's for for them, for your wife and kids. And I think he says like in the end, it's good for the family. I was like, this man from like 7 years ago up until now has not changed his perspective at all, which just speaks to how much he's believed his own like narrative, you know, which inherently I think is kind of fascinating and interesting that he's not taken a turn at all, and such a like foil and a contrast to Russ, who is sees himself so clearly, sees the world so clearly, and has achieved a level of self acceptance about it, which is I think why he's charismatic to us as the viewer. But the foil of the self delusion that Marty lives in is like very fascinating to me. Sarah's like, I don't care. This is why he's a trash human, because he has no ability to see.
Well, no, because like that is also something that I find very interesting when like a character believes their own mythology and it leads to their downfall. Like I think that is a really like fascinating thing to explore. So I could see how some of these things that are being teed up could potentially become interesting, but I'm at the present moment uninterested. So I don't know. We will see.
Pat and Nate, I'm curious your thoughts about episode 2, the second time around. What stood out to you?
The fifth?
Yeah.
Or fifth?
I watched this with a little bit of a lens, keeping an eye on how much it advanced or didn't advance the general case. And, you know, because that was something that was commented on with episode 1. Sarah, you like juicy crime stuff. And one thing I was thinking about is I actually kind of appreciate the way they're executing in this show, because I feel like it's intentionally slow, and that's really what detective work is like. I mean, I've watched more hours than I care to admit of Law and Order, and it's so formulaic, and it's like, oh, we found a body at breakfast, we had DNA results by lunchtime, and 15 suspects by like happy hour, and we wrap the case by bedtime. Like boom, 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 boom. And in this one, it's like they have stretches where just nothing happens, and I think that also kind of helps the world building of just like they live in this desolate area where there's just like barely a pulse in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I agree with that. I do remember thinking, I think when I first watched this, I was a little bit frustrated with like how little of the mystery and the plot was advanced by this episode. Now that I know like how all that like ultimately comes to fruition, I actually find like the mystery and all those things like the least exciting part. So I like this episode a lot upon rewatch. And like I forgot about like how little it advances, and when they're doing like the interviews and stuff in the beginning, I'm kind of like, oh, it's boring. But yeah, I agree with that perspective, Pat. I think that's a sort of a shrewd observation, that it sort of like is deliberately slow, and they even comment on it like in the show, and like they like it's kind of a plot point like how slowly things are moving, and like they're like, you should probably pass this case off because it's not going anywhere and it's very high profile. And I like how that kind of got worked in. But yeah, I don't know, I really like, you know, how much present day Rust gets like screen time to Vise and everything, and like all that stuff I really dig and could watch that over and over again. So I don't know, I just really enjoy that. So I liked watching this episode again for sure.
Nate and I just want to be those two dudes in the room that just get to like
exactly.
ask Russ some questions and hear him like, you know, go on tangents and be like, wait, sorry, what?
Tell you that you can't interrupt his day off drinking protocols.
Yeah, I love all that.
I do too. It really feels like Rust is the star of the show on many fronts, both from the like effectiveness of the case and also a lot of the like philosophical musings that he brings. And so I'm just like very intrigued to see what they're going to do with Marty as a character, because he seems to be on the sidelines or serving as this foil to Rust in so many areas. He's not really contributing much to the case yet. And then from a character perspective, I think he's probably a little bit more thin than Rust is. Rust, there's clearly a lot of depth there. And we learn a lot about his background and his past and whatnot. And with Marty, there's less that we know. I think we learn a lot more in this one. I'm just like, what will they do with that dynamic and with Marty? I feel like there's a lot more story to be told for Marty that we've gotten so far.
Well, I think though we kind of have to think about it, right? Like a lot of what we're learning about Rust is commentary. A lot of what we are like what's being given to us of Marty is interaction. Like we see him interact with his in-laws, we see him interact with more people that he has more significant relationships with. So we're seeing how he navigates these different scenarios, these different conversations. If we only could depend on that for Rust, we would have him talking to two people and not have a clue what was going on in his head or who he was.
Mm-hmm. I also think we're being a little unfair to the character of Marty. I don't know if he's like, I don't know if it's necessarily like a super thin character. I think it's just been done before. So I think like the tropes feel a little bit tired, especially like going on like 10 years from the show. And we've seen like these sorts of character flaws so many times, even when the show came out. So I think that's probably part of why it's sort of it feels a little stale in that regard. But I do think that like putting this like, you know, the Marty character with so many like hypocrisies and self-delusion up against like the Russ character that is like so self-aware and self-assured of like who he is, faults and all, is like, you know, that dynamic is very interesting, and every time they interact, I enjoy watching that as well.
Well, that's the beautiful like duality of the two characters, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Is that one believes there's rules to how everything works, and the other one believes that we exist in uncertainty and that there are no guardrails. And so, you know, them trying to coexist and also be able to have the same goal for even remotely similar reasons is a very interesting journey, I think, to watch.
Which is why I'm intrigued to see if this show is kind of a slow burn at the beginning, because it's building those foundations, and then it can have these things start to collide with each other. Because
it's a slow burn because it's an HBO show. We all know that in the first season of any HBO show, anthology or not, you have to get 50% of the way in before you can formulate a true opinion about it.
At least episode 5, yes. Yeah.
Episode 5 of 8.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a very good point, because I think that like if I think about, you know, a show like The Wire, I think it took like 4 or 5 episodes for them to just establish who is who and what are the relational dynamics at play, and then you can see them all kind of collide and bump up against each other, and there we get the tension, and then there's this long journey that we can go on with them. So yeah, we're in the foundation building phase.
I feel like Game of Thrones is the same way. almost. They have so many characters, and there's so much referential conversation to characters that are off screen that you haven't even met yet.
Yeah, that's true.
It's like an intellectual exercise to stay with the show to the point where you're like, oh, I now speak the language. I'm not saying that True Detective is that, but I think HBO has a way about themselves of like serving you like an HBO stylized appetizer that you just have to power through before you can get to the main course.
Yeah. Game of Thrones is interesting. I feel like if you weren't already like a fantasy nerd or really liked that fantasy aesthetic, like I don't know how people hung on like for that whole first season until like, you know, the big event at the end of the first season.
Right? Well, Nate, you know how I did. I just had to have a surgery and be cuffed to my couch for
yeah,
like
there
3
you go.
weeks.
Yeah, you consumed a lot of entertainment that year.
I sure did. I think I tallied it up, and it was like 37 seasons of television in the 10 months with the physical therapy hours.
Oh my goodness! Did you have like a palate cleansers throughout the day? You know.
No, I had 2 hours of PT at home every night and 1 hour in the morning before work. So I was getting up like at an ungodly hour and would watch an hour of TV. And it was right, I think, around the last season of Breaking Bad. So I like finished off the last couple seasons of that and then watched the 4 seasons of Game of Thrones that were out and a whole bunch of other shit. Clearly.
It's a shame they never made any more seasons after the 4th one.
Keep telling yourself that.
Okay, any other thoughts about episode 2?
I like one thing that and I guess I kind of alluded to this before. I really like the setting kind of as its own character. Like, this is a world I have no exposure to in my lived experience, especially at a time before technology being, you know, what it is and what it's been for the majority of my life. And so you know, think about the things that are prioritized in the world today and how we navigate and we think about diversity and inclusion and accessibility and like safety and all these things. And I think about like the mom that they go to talk to and her hands are shaking and she says, oh, I worked in dry cleaning for 30 years, the chemicals. And I very much have to believe that's probably a very real thing. Like, you know, before we lived in such an advanced world, like there were careers that literally ruin people's lives. Not that there aren't now, but there are a lot less. And it's going to be in those more impoverished places, I think, where that's just tolerated, and you're kind of going to find that. Like everyone, it's just this world where everyone's doing the best that they can. I think you see that at the ranch as well. I really like the comment that the madam makes about you have a problem with this because you don't own it all of a sudden. I think there's a realness to that still is true today, in terms of, you know, gender dynamics, but we won't dive into that. So I think that the show does a really good job of, and especially in this episode you see it, in this episode you see the baseball player that has fallen ill, and you know, it's just this sad world. In this case, although we don't know much about it, hasn't advanced yet, they're just trying to bring justice and make something, even though they're in a world where this could just be written off and forgotten about. You know, in this world of, as Rust would call it, pros and narcotics and so on, like, why should anyone care? But they still do.
I think that's what makes these two men and their psyches very interesting, because how they see the world also differs pretty significantly, and their choices for how they're surviving in the world. Like Russ sees it clearly and has kind of given up on the world, and Eliza is incredibly jaded by everything he's experienced. Whereas you see on the flip side, Marty's still trying to like survive and play the game in the world, kind of like that fishbowl metaphor that you talked about. But in a lot of ways, he's sheltered from a lot of it as well. Like the shots of his home with his kids, like this like beautiful home that is, I think, in-laws own. Like he's clearly not fully connected with the world that he's investigating in, whereas Rust has a lot more experience and has understood it and can see it a lot more clearly, whereas Marty's kind of just living in an alternate reality with his home life and whatnot. And so I'm intrigued to see if his journey is maybe losing some of the self-delusion and potentially seeing the effed up world for what it really is. You know what I mean? And what that does for him as a person, as a character, because they come from totally different worlds, and you can see a little bit more of that, I think, with the scene with the in-laws, for example, or so many of the shots of his home and family life that he's trying to maintain while be engaging with the real world out there.
Yeah, it's a good point. There's like definitely a sharper dichotomy between like Marty's home life and like the world that they have to delve into to do this job, whereas like Rust is like buying drugs and living in like sleeping on the floor and all this other stuff, and was undercover for 4 years and definitely is like lived it more than Marty has.
I thought this episode cinematically was like quite artistic and beautiful with some of the transition shots as well. Like I think there was one there was a shot of just burned trees in a forest, and I think to your point, Pat, around like visually communicating that sense and that feeling and that aesthetic. And there's also like a really artistic shot of, I think it was Rust's voiceover where he's talking about like the days are long when there are no insights, and it's just like his silhouetted arched back, and you can feel the weight of the days and like the grind and whatnot. It's just like his silhouetted arched back against a white wall. I just thought that there were so many more of those shots. Maybe I noticed them more after you made that comment in our episode 1 discussion, Nate. I think episode 1 I was like, who are these people? Now I'm like, I can see the way that they're visually creating the sense and the feelings that the characters are experiencing in this world that they're creating. So I had my eye on that a little bit more this time.
Yeah, I also really dig the like hallucinations. Like I think they're very simple effects, but I think they're really effective, like effectively employed.
Cool. Any other last thoughts about episode 2 before we give out some awards?
I'd be curious what you both, Jen and Sarah, thought about that last scene where they're at the dilapidated chapel and Rust makes his discovery.
Sarah, your thoughts?
I was like, finally a clue. We got a clue.
She's like, we're way past lunch and we still don't have any DNA test results. Give us something.
Also, this is not an important point, but when they're in the church, there is an owl that's up on one of the rafters. And I was like, oh my gosh, there's an owl. That's so cool. Which is not the point of the scene, but there is a real owl up there.
There is.
Wow, this is incredible. And it stayed there because like they do a shot and you can see it, and then there's another angle and then they come back and the owl is still there. It's pretty cool. But yeah, I was happy that we are seeming to make some momentum on this case, which I'm trying to get all on board for this character study, and I'm trying, but I still want progress on the case. I think we can do both at the same time. We'll see. I did look up what those verses were on the walls when they found it. I don't remember what they are anymore, but I thought that was also very interesting. The verses that they chose on the walls were fascinating, because I think one of them was Jesus healing somebody, and then the other one, if I'm remembering correctly, was when Samson killed a bunch of people as his like final like dying act, if I'm remembering correctly. And so I thought that those were very interesting to include. I'm sure that there will be references back to that at some point, but yeah, mostly just excitement about the case.
I think that the major needs to fire Marty and hire Sarah, clearly.
Hey man, we'll solve this. I have a degree in crime solving purely from police procedurals. That's it. We can knock this out.
I think Sarah needs to be the police captain. It's just like, I want to see more progress, damn it.
I mean, honestly. Though, like, I was really excited when he gave them 2 weeks. I was like, okay, now we have a time frame. We got to get stuff moving if we only have 2 weeks to lock this down. Like, okay, good. Here we go.
I can't wait until episode 3 when we see the captain introduce Sergeant Olivia Benson and Lieutenant Finn Tutuola from New York to help them push the case forward.
It's the greatest crossover. What more could you ask?
Law and Order SVU meets True Detective.
Yeah, man. Hey, Olivia Benson will handle this. Don't you worry. She always gets her man.
The show so far, I mean, 2 of 2, like leaving us on some good little cliffhangers. So
you didn't answer the question about your thoughts of the thing.
Oh, I was just like, cool, I'm excited for the next episode. I forgot we were solving a case. Maybe Sarah will finally be happy.
Oh, I see.
All right, let's give out some awards. First one being Best Jab. Pat, do you want to share yours first?
Yes. You got some self-loathing to do this morning, that's fine. But it ain't worth losing your hands over.
That's what I chose too.
Really?
Yeah. When that scene happened, I was like, that's the one. I don't care what happens the second half of this episode. That's right. All right. Nate, what was your choice?
Yeah, the one that I chose was when he gives money to the young girl and Russ is like, that a down payment?
I love that one too.
I thought that was gold.
So good. Sarah, what about you?
Mine is when the captain says, well, you're a smartass with your mouth shut.
That's great.
That's a good one. I love that whole scene. And when he's like, how many different ways do I have to say shut the fuck up?
Anyways, he just raises his hand. All right. The next category is Best Character Clue, which, as a refresher, is a character revealing moment where something hidden comes to light. Could be big or subtle. All right. So we're going to start.
All this episode was.
Okay. So mine is about Rust. And there are multiple times in the episode where he basically like doesn't look at himself in the mirror. So like in his apartment, he has like a really tiny little like reflective surface on the wall that he looks at. He doesn't have a rear view mirror in his truck. So it's a weird little detail. And so I was wondering like if that shows like his like shame and like maybe some like self-hatred, self-dislike, something that he's going through at that point in time. But then that theory was there was a little crack put in it because he looks in the mirror when he's getting ready in the locker room at the police station. So I wonder if it's something like devoid of police work. There's some self-loathing there, but when he is a policeman and when he has that identity, then like he can look at himself in the mirror. So I think that there's something there with his character and how he feels about himself.
Nice. That's a good one. You usually say that you don't like the metaphor symbolism stuff, but look at you.
I'm very bad at them. I have to try real hard to find these metaphors. I'm trying, and I'm looking for little tiny things.
I was gonna ask, so are you always like super detail oriented, like noticing the owl and like the
annoying
mirrors? Or are you just so fucking bored by this show that you're just like, what else is going on screen? I don't know.
There's an owl.
I think it's a bit of both, but it is the way that my brain works, which is a whole hot mess where I fixate on little details and it just is what it is. So here we are.
Next episode, she's going to tell us that like one of the door jambs has crooked molding in Marty's house somewhere, like off the kitchen or something.
Hey, if it's there, I will find it. Don't you worry.
All right, Nate, Who are you giving, or what are you giving this character clue to?
I don't know if I'm supposed to pick like a specific scene or like subtle moment. I had for this like Marty's family dynamic. I think that this makes it like very blunt that he's like having an affair, and like his fight with his wife at home was just like super disrespectful and like just like very sort of dismissive of everything that she's saying. And like you see the impact that his career is having like on like his children's development and like the how they're playing with their toys and stuff like that, and how they sort of, you know, view their parents' relationship, asking if he's coming to dinner and stuff like that. So I thought this was like a big kind of revealing moment for how uh, unstable and fragile Marty's like home life is.
I also had that, but since you so eloquently shared, I will switch to Rust sharing specifically what happened to his daughter and the toll that it took on his marriage. We got a deeper look at what happened versus what he shared with Marty's wife in the first episode, but still leaving some amount of mystery because he said, you know, we turned on each other. The marriage couldn't make it after that. We, again, don't fully know what that all looks like or have details beyond that, but we at least now know a little more about what has contributed to Rust being Rust. And also, this is what then led us to know that he just dove deep into his work as a UC and unapologetically and relentlessly.
Yeah, and that, to follow up with what you're saying, the relationship that I think her name was Lori, that Maggie introduced him to, that also didn't work out too because of, you know, the toll that their jobs take on them. Like I think it makes you a lot more empathetic, maybe slightly more empathetic to Marty and him and the fight that he has with his wife. Like there's pressure and burdens and things that he just doesn't know how to process, and this is his way of trying to process that. It's
I can see the flames in Sarah's eyes through the laptop from what you just said.
No, he just needs a lot of therapy, and I would like to get him to see a therapist and work through some of these things rather than taking his job out on other people. Like, let's see if we can get you healthy there, buddy.
Okay, hold on. Let's just back up a second. We all know you don't care about him and you think he's a trash human to the point where him getting therapy is not something you even like care about.
No, like, yes, therapy is a good thing, even for trash human beings. Why not? If Marty would do it, it would be great.
I hope this show gives Marty something redeemable that we get to talk about with Sarah too. I think that will be very fun.
I hope so too. I am ready to be wrong. I am ready for there to be something good about Marty. We just haven't discovered it yet. Maybe next episode. We shall see.
My choice for this category is also Marty related, but it's the line when he says, "In the end, it's good for the family too." It's like, oh, that is insightful for your mental psyche all these years later. Okay, so looking ahead, Sarah, what are you hoping to see? I don't even think we need to ask this, but what are you hoping to see?
I mean, you already know. I'm looking for some detective work. I am looking for finding some clues, piecing some things together, finding some leads, making some progress. Because you only got 2 weeks. So use your time wisely. We got a case to solve.
I am intrigued to see what they do with Marty's character. I'm like very, very curious if they bring more complexity, more depth, more things for us to chew on with who Marty is. And then they reference a brawl or something that happened in the woods between the two of them. I think it's Rust that mentions it towards the end of the episode, or something happened in the woods between them, and I'm curious to know more. There's a couple of like events that they've alluded to, also in episode 1 too, if they're falling out, that I'm just like, what happened between these two? So I'm intrigued if they will tell us more. Probably not, but they'll probably just give us more things to be curious about, more questions, but maybe we'll find out more things. I love that. I am intrigued to know what happens between these two people. Like, that is my detective story, is like, who are these two humans? And Sarah's is like, okay, but who was the murderer? Like, give me the actual case.
Yes, I would like to know. Like, that's great. We can learn more about these guys too, but like, murder, it's a big deal.
Nate, Pat, any thoughts on maybe how this episode is laying foundations for what's coming next without giving too much away? Any thoughts?
No. I don't think I want to spoil anything.
Okay.
It's too fine a line to tread with this show, especially with like all the different timelines and everything. As far as what I'm hoping to see in the next episode, just like something that delights Sarah.
We will see.
Maybe more owls. Just owls in all the rafters.
Yes. Why not? That would be so fun. I mean, just go investigate at Hogwarts. Like, yes, why not? But hopefully next episode, my first thought of the show won't be, it's fine. Hopefully I will have some sort of opinion that we can talk about.
Mm-hmm.
Pat, any thoughts?
I'm in the same camp as Nate. I'm not going to touch that one. As to not give anything away. I guess if anything, I'm mostly excited to see how Ice-T's cop character interacts with Rust and receives all of his self-prophesizing rhetoric.
Honestly, it'd be great. That'd be so fun. What a weird combination of characters. I'm here for it.
All right. Well, we will continue on our journey with episode 3 next week. So this is our review and discussion of episode 2. You can find it available on Max. Thank you for listening to this episode of TV and Us. Our name sums it up. We're big fans of TV and the powerful ways we can connect with each other and the world around us. This podcast is about all of us and our shared stories, even Marty's story. Everyone is welcome here, and we're so glad you hung out with us today as we continued our journey through True Detective Season 2. You can subscribe to this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or wherever you tune into your favorite shows. Drop us a review letting us know your thoughts about the characters and development of the show so far. You can connect with us on Instagram and Twitter at TVNSPod or email us at tvnspod@gmail.com. We will be back next week to discuss episode 3. We hope you have an amazing week, and we'll talk again soon.